Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips, with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this episode, I'm joined by Eve Stanway, psychotherapist and breakup and divorce coach, to learn about the key skills that will help us have productive arguments that won't escalate. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Eve.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you. I'm delighted to be joined by you today. And this episode is all about, just to give it some context, disagreeing agreeably or in a calm and measured way. So we'll jump into all of that. But just before we do, give us a little bit of background. So share a little bit about your own separation and the role that disagreements played in that.
So it really starts, my parents separated in an acrimonious, that's the way I can describe it, way, when I was 7. And I witnessed it from the inside. And then if we fast forward to my marriage, I was with my ex-husband for 27 years in total. And he was the one who actually asked me for a divorce. And at the time that he asked me for a divorce, I was devastated. And I think, like a lot of people, we kind of feel that we're in the right and they're in the wrong. And it was certainly very easy for me to be very, very angry with him. But over the 8 years since then, I've really come to understand that a lot of the issues that we faced were around not being able to have difficult conversations. And so what happened is that instead of agreeing or disagreeing, we just shut down, or it turned into an argument. And one of the biggest things for me was realizing my part in that. And so from my background of navigating through the divorce, navigating with myself and realizing I was a psychotherapist for 25 years before that happened. So you would think I would know this stuff. But of course, experience is the best teacher, isn't it? So that's what's really led me to the understanding that how we argue, how we disagree in a relationship is crucial to the success of the relationship.
Yes, I totally get where you're coming from. And it's so hard, isn't it? Because like you, my background is counseling psychology. So it's the idea that you should know all of this and that you should kind of be able to navigate relationships better because that's your training. That it's a heavy cloak to wear, I sometimes think, isn't it?
I think it really is. An understanding that we all face new situations every day and we come at it with the best that we've got. But we've always got to be ready to change and look back at ourselves as well as the other person.
But I also think for people listening to podcasts like this or to the advice, there's so much advice out there and everyone always seems to know what they do. And I think just for us to be humble and show that humility is really important because kind of like we're talking now from experience as much as any theoretical perspective, aren't we? And what it feels like to be in that scenario. And it is difficult when you're there. But I agree as well. It's so interesting how you argue, how you resolve differences is absolutely fundamental to how you successfully navigate all relationships, not just romantic ones. And I think from what you were saying, those seeds are sown very early on in life, aren't they? In terms of how you absorb what your family upbringing was like, how your parents resolved things. So say a little bit more about that. Do you think that you were almost following a pattern that you'd learnt from being a child, or do you think something else was going on?
I really do think over years of studying this and being interested in this, my first degree before I got into this was philosophy, and I was interested in philosophy of mind and philosophy of language. It's always been something. And what I think is the learning how to argue, learning how to disagree, learning how to remain regulated is a skill set. And I think that in my childhood, I learned loads of skills navigating my parents' divorce and navigating those adult emotions, but I didn't ever learn how to manage what happens when somebody else has a viewpoint which is confrontational to my own, and what you do in that situation. Because what can happen, and certainly I recognize it used to happen with me, is that I went into a form of fight or flight, where I would either want to fly, which is shut down and storm off, or I would want to fight, which led to kind of escalating. And then it turns into and then you start adding and you did this and you did that and you did the other. So the skills I learned to resolve arguments in my childhood were either avoid, and just do stuff so that you just get it done so that you don't have to have a difficult argument. Or I learned how to kind of fight back, thinking that was assertive. I thought I was an assertive person. But of course, being assertive doesn't mean going into battle. Being assertive means being very calm and clear and knowing actually what a boundary is. So my upbringing taught me lots, but the crucial skill of how to disagree, how to navigate an opposite opinion without falling into conflict, I didn't learn it. I just didn't learn it. And I learned in psychotherapy, I learned how to listen and I learned how to challenge. But of course, the environment in psychotherapy is different because it's not a personal relationship. So I think I just didn't learn skills. And that's what I see in my clinical practice, that these are skills that we can learn.
Do you think then that arguments in and of themselves, what do they say about a relationship? Because if you can have an argument or a disagreement, is it an argument if you're following the rules you've just set out? I mean, you were saying about language before, is the language important about how we term these kind of interactions? So is it an argument or what defines an argument? And what does having arguments say within a relationship, if anything?
Well, I'm of the view that diversity is good. Diversity is good throughout society, but it's actually good in relationships. And certainly when we have children, we're bringing in diverse little human beings into our lives. So all of us have a different perception. I can see what I can see right now, and you can see what you can see. It is when we come together in those two perceptions that we start to get a perspective. And I go, oh, I can see this, but you can see that. So disagreeing is something that we need to be able to do. It's such an important part of driving knowledge and experience forwards is disagreement. We need it. If you look at science is largely based around disagreement. We're meant to disagree. Scientists absolutely don't agree. That's the whole point. So disagreement is important. Dispute is important. Arguments are fine. But it's when it turns into a battle. I'm right and you're wrong. Instead of going, golly, we don't agree, that's important. And then particularly when it becomes personalized. There's a philosopher, one of my favorites, Arthur Schopenhauer. Okay, what a guy. But he wrote a really interesting little treatise called 38 Ways to Win an Argument. And he said that there were basically 6 ways to win an argument looking for truth, and all the rest are just about winning. And perhaps we see a lot of that in politics, and that's saying, well, somebody like you would say that, or you've never, is when we start getting personal with the argument, and that's when it gets plain dirty, I would say. And then that's not constructive, it's destructive.
And then when you have arguments, and are arguments different in different phases of the relationship? So, this is all about this is the divorce podcast. So we talk a lot about divorce. Is it natural to think that an argument in the context of a divorce is going to be different? Or are all arguments fundamentally at their sort of core the same, and the context doesn't really make any difference to them?
I think human beings don't like change. However, there is a tendency with humans to think that somehow change might make something better. So a lot of the work that I do, and I was surprised when I started specializing in divorce, which I did because I saw the damage that divorce causes children primarily. But I was surprised at how often I'm working with couples to save their relationships, Do you remember that old-fashioned phrase, being on your marriage is on the rocks? Well, I feel like sometimes I'm steering people off the rocks to save the relationships. But to get to your question, what I've noticed is the problems that are there within conversation in the relationship will magnify and become more challenging during the divorce. And that's probably what you say.
It's such a rough end of the stick, isn't it? Because at the time when you absolutely need to be on the top of your game with communication, it's usually at the point at which all comms is broken down and you're barely speaking and you're just sort of existing in a house and giving one-syllable answers and all of that kind of stuff. And yet it really is the time when you need to pull yourself out and roll your sleeves up and get the skills going. What advice would you give people in terms of how can you, if you're in a pattern where you're arguing in a destructive way, you haven't been displaying some of the skills you talked about earlier, how do you stop that cycle? And how do you get to a place where you can have a better class of argument, for want of a better phrase?
I don't know whether this is something that's kind of part of your work as well, but I always look very closely at people's support group. Sometimes if we're feeling embattled, we can attract the people around us who kind of add to the war. Oh, he did that. She did that. Oh, it's outrageous. What you need to do is go and roar. So I think it's really important. And I certainly encourage people to say, well, who is the calmest person around you who's constructive? The second thing, and I'm very direct and frank with the people I work with a lot of men actually, as well as women, a lot, over 50% of my caseload is men actually. And if there are children, I say, who is, whilst you are embattled and saying that your other, your soon to be ex is a this, that, and the other, this is your children's other parents. Even if it's a step parent, it's the other step parent. So when you are having that embattled argument state, your children, no matter what their ages, your children are going to hear it being directed at them as well. They will be caught in friendly fire. So who you are speaking to really, really matters, because if the person you're speaking to is egging you up and raising the temperature, that's probably not helpful. If the person you're speaking to is calming things down and helping you regulate, then that is positive. So that's a really big thing. Who are you speaking to? And that's why actively encourage people. I encourage people to get legal advice, but you must be the same. There's a massive amount of ignorance about the actual process of divorce and what happens, which means that people unwittingly go to solicitors and not realizing that solicitors are not the right people to direct your divorce. They're good for legal advice. That is it. And so that's the other thing. I spend a lot of time saying, this is the process. This is the application for divorce. This is the financial order. This is the childcare, blah, blah, blah. Also, the family courts are not judging good and evil. They're just judging how to end the marriage. So it's kind of, where are you getting your advice and your information from? And are you getting good information? Because if you're not, you're going to spend a lot of money and go down a bad path.
Well, we always say with solicitors, it's their job is to give you the individual advice, and they can't look at the family. They can't tell you what's best for the family, because they are duty bound to give you the advice. And if they don't, you can sue them. So it's not that they're nasty people. It's just not the right process.
I think also the fact that people's first instinct is, I need to go to a solicitor, whereas actually the first instinct, no, that's not the first thing to do.
Well, we always say that with our ad campaigns, we're trying to break that link between, walking down the street and saying to people, what do you do when you need to get divorced? We're trying to break the link between them saying, go to a solicitor, because there are so many other places that are very much better suited to sorting things out amicably before you go anywhere near a solicitor and even the legal advice. So it's definitely some food for thought. It sounds to me like the root of being more successful in the way you disagree is this notion of self-regulation. Just say a bit more about, is that something you can learn? Is it something, if you're past your teen years and it's not there, it's gone? How can you tap into self-regulation?
They often talk, don't they, about transferable skills, but people aren't necessarily taught to look at it this way. if you can be regulated in the workplace, then you can be regulated at home. It is our personal responsibility to manage our own feelings and emotions. There's a lot of confusing messaging out there suggesting that someone else can make you upset. Other people can certainly do very, very upsetting things. But how we react and how we respond is our own responsibility. And what I think is the shift to a no-fault divorce happened very, very recently. It was in the last 5 years, wasn't it? That means up until now, there has always had to be a goodie and a baddie in terms of divorce. It's written into our psychology. Prior to that, divorce was very, very much more difficult and people were expected to stay together.
The fault-based system has pervaded for centuries. So yeah, we're only just out the other side.
Exactly. So people being able to see that you can just say, you know what, I've got a choice. This person is really treating me really unkindly. I'm very unhappy in this relationship. I have spoken with them and I've asked them whether things can be different, but they don't seem to want to change. So the right thing to do is to end the relationship, not the old trope of, no, we've got to work at it. And that means I need to, have you tried everything? I remember being asked by people when I went through my divorce, well, Eve, have you really tried? You know, sometimes you're a bit irritable and you look a bit this, that, and the other. I was asked and I felt such shame because I felt that I had failed. And that's what you hear with a lot of people, isn't it? So I think it is something that a skill we can learn, but we're only going to learn it when we start thinking, hold on, I need to learn that skill. And we have a choice. And the choice is we can leave a bad relationship and we can still create a good co-parenting relationship without being married or with each other, you know, and that's what we should be looking at.
I think as women, particularly, sometimes we feel like we've got to keep everything together, the show on the road, the family unit. And that sense of, as you've just described, failure or letting the side down in some way is quite pervasive. So I think ultimately it's not about failing. It's about changing the structure of the family so that everybody can thrive. And I think if you start to see it in that way, because if you've got kids, you're always going to be a family of some kind, a blended family or a separated family, but you'll be a family because you've got parents and you've got a child involved. So changing the structure and the way you live so that everybody can be successful and can be their best selves, that to me feels like a brave and empowering move, which is a far cry from how divorce is often seen, which is something as a failure and something destructive and something to be avoided at all costs. But I think the individual growth there is so important, and to sit in a relationship where there can be no growth, where it's destructive, where you're role modeling to children that this is just what you put up with, the way this relationship is working. I find that overwhelmingly negative, and I find the choice to try and allow everybody to thrive a much more positive and brave one. Hello, my lovely listeners. I hope you're finding this episode helpful and comforting. I just wanted to take a moment to share some news. I've written a book and it's called Amicable Divorce. It's a practical guide to separating with dignity, supporting your children and navigating finances and co-parenting without unnecessary conflict. It's all the guidance you can usually find on the podcast and much more. If that sounds helpful, you can pre-order it today on Amazon. Thanks so much, and now let's get back to the show.
I completely agree. I feel that women, and it's not always women, you know, I work across same-sex relationships and actually you see the same dynamics. So it's not necessarily a male-female thing. I think it's more to do with an empathy thing, and also to do with the fact that some people, when the going gets tough, they work harder and other people switch off. I think it's more, I don't think it's male and female so much. I think it's actually character and psychology for me. But what I notice is, and I think this is why I work with men a lot, I didn't necessarily have the best father in the world, but I have a strong, strong belief in the importance of fathers. And I think one of the things that can happen is when women are working very, very hard to keep all the balls juggling, which they do magnificently well, but to their own detriment of health and well-being very often, because of the changing roles for men in society, because it's no longer clearly defined. You have men who become lost in a sense of what it is that they are meant to be able to do or what they can do very competently. And the narrative is to some extent, in the same way it used to be anti-women, and still is anti-women, but it's also anti-men. So what I see when I'm looking at the work where I'm working with men is they may be behaving quite badly, and I don't condone their bad behavior, but very often they don't know how to behave right. And by offering guidance, some of the areas that men can go, I mean, I'd see a lot of men, they say, well, there's nowhere for me to go and get help and advice on how to be a dad and how to navigate it. So I'm doing what I did during the relationship, which is I switch off and avoid and disappear. And I'm like, well, you don't need to do that. You can learn. So women are working very hard and juggling everything, which is then causing more men, I think, to switch off and disengage, which then the cycle kind of perpetrates. So for me, working with men is crucial, because I remember one couple I worked with, and the dad he'd had an affair and he was just going to leave. And I knew that if he left, he'd stop having a relationship with their son, and that would leave the mum having to do all of the care with their son, who had quite high needs. And so she would end up really isolated in doing everything, and he would have ended up completely disconnected. And I recommended them. I was like, no, I'm going to say quite firmly, I'd like you to live together for 3 months, very, very, very well managed, so that you can learn how to agree, disagree, but also so that he can become a good dad, which he really is now. But also then she gets a life of her own. So, that's an unusual way of going about doing it, and it wouldn't work for everyone. But it has taken something that would have been absolutely devastating and high conflict and really damaging to the son. And actually they're not going to be friends after what they've gone through, those two, that they can communicate constructively. And their son is doing so well. He's such a lovely man, but he's got his dad and his mum, and he would have lost that. So the women doing lots of things then leads to this men not knowing what to do. And then they just disappear, and we can't be letting that happen. We need dads. We need men in the families.
I like the idea that learning how to argue, even if you're going down a path where maybe you're not going to be together, it's still an important skill. It's not one that just ends because your relationship ends. It's one that's actually, it feels more like a life skill that you need throughout your lives and whatever relationship or not that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, if we think about children, obviously I reflect back on my childhood, and that's where I didn't learn the skills of disagreeing. My children are grown up now, but my gosh, they know how to disagree with me. And it's confronting sometimes, because I was raised in an environment where you don't disagree with an adult. But I've taught my children to disagree vociferously if they disagree with me, which they do often, because, why wouldn't they? So the consequences of learning how to disagree effectively is that you will teach your children how to disagree with you and other people. And ultimately, I believe that will keep them safer in the world, because they'll have the skills to disagree. So it really matters being able to disagree, because you can't assert a boundary. You can't progress. You can't do things without being able to say, well, I just don't agree with what you've said there, but I'm happy to live in harmony with you.
Yes. How do you think you teach children to self-regulate? What are the skills that they need so they can navigate this stuff for themselves?
So it's interesting. I'm contemplating sitting down and writing my next book at the moment, which is going to be how we have difficult conversations, specifically with the 18 to 28-year-olds, the younger adults, those. So I think, first of all, understanding child development and understanding that the teenage years children are pretty much, there seems to be some evidence. I mean, they're doing the work. The children are pretty much during their teenage years made to not listen to their parents. Okay. Now, on the basis that my teenage children aren't going to want to listen to me, teaching them that it's okay to disagree, and it's okay for me to have an opinion and okay for them to have an opinion, even if it's different, is crucial to me being able to give them the messages without expecting compliance. And that's the key thing. If I expect you to comply with what I've said, Now, there will be some things that maybe I am expecting, but actually, if I'm asking you to come home by 10 o'clock, then I'm actually asking for your agreement to do it, even though you perhaps disagree with the need to do it. So by having the dialogue right about what this is, not I'm telling you and I'll ground you if you don't do it. Good luck with that with the modern teenager. But if we're going to say, listen, you can massively help me out. If you're not going to get back by 10, please send me a text because I'm really worried and my anxiety is over the roof and I'd appreciate it. Then what we're doing is that we are interacting correctly. They may not agree with the need, but they may still do it. So teaching children how to, in my practice, I won't see children. I will only see parents because my view is it comes from the parents. If a parent is not being emotionally regulated and clear, but expecting the child to, they are parentifying the child. They're not meaning to, but they are. So as a phrase in my book that I use on my course as well, which is calm is contagious. If I'm out of control, I need to go and walk around the garden till I calm down, and then I need to address it. I have to do what I need to do to calm myself down before I talk to a young adult or a child, because otherwise the danger is we're screaming at our children and expecting them to be calm, and that's just not fair, you know. So that's what I think. I think we have to do it. We have to be willing to put our money where our mouth is and do it. And I can't tell you how hard I find that myself.
I definitely find it hard. I'm replaying all of the scraps I've had with my kids over the last few days. And there's one big one brewing at the moment about the retake of a maths GCSE, which I'm going to apply some of this to now.
Yeah, definitely. But it's hard. All you can do is seek compliance and hope, but they're not going to just do it because you're telling them. And so how we speak with our children, it matters, because how we speak to them and how we teach them is an acceptable and unacceptable way. Will be, when they go out in the world, what they know.
What they know, yeah, exactly, and what they repeat.
Exactly.
But I guess one of the biggest challenges in any kind of separation circumstance is actually arguments around what's going to happen with the children. I guess they're the ones that become hardest to regulate. So what do you sort of say to parents when they're trying to have conversations about the kids, or trying to sort issues out as separated parents? How do you regulate in those circumstances when it's something that feels so kind of guttural and for lots of parents, it's the hardest bit of any divorce, isn't it?
It is. So one of the things in most relationships, you have one parent who is slightly more empathic to the kids' needs and one who is less, just because of humans are different. The empathic parent may or may not, depending on the relationship, have spent more time with the children than the other one. Now, and I see this a lot with dads. If a dad he's been out at work and he's not spent a lot of time with the kids, and then all of a sudden he's faced with a weekend looking after his children, you would think, they're his kids. He knows how to do it. But he doesn't, because he's always looked after his children with the filter of the other person. What that means is the dad has never had to go it alone. And it's difficult if you're not experienced. So one of the things I say, and if it's men and women, and I'll say, if you want the dad to be a good dad who can really look after these kids, we have to look very realistically about what his skills are and how we develop these skills. So if we go back to the couple, we needed to develop his parenting skills because he'd always, when it got difficult, deferred to the mother to do it. Well, now that wasn't going to work. He was the one going to have to deal with meltdowns, him. So if we empower and instill a man or the woman, if it happened to be the woman, to be able to look after the children, then what will happen is that it will be much more successful and we'll feel more relaxed about it. And you must see this as well. You will get somebody and they're devastated because their kids are with the other parent, but they don't trust that the other parent's going to do the right thing. And the reason why is because the other parent has never really had to do full-time Friday to get them to school with all of their belongings for Tuesday morning. They've never had to do it before, so they don't know how to do it. And when they're getting it wrong and we criticize them, then they're going to shut down and get defensive, and then it's going to turn into a fight. So what we want to do is say, right, okay, we're going to get a divorce. Do you know how to look after the kids for 7 days if we do this as a co-parenting? Because if you don't, we're going to be getting into trouble. Do you know what they need? Do you know what they need for school? Do you know what they need? Let me write you a checklist. Let me help you learn how to do it. Because if we can do this effectively, so much the better. So again, it's going back to learnableness.
I was thinking as well, there are so many different patterns and ways you can keep in touch with children now, aren't there? There's lots of different ways that building a strong relationship with them, doesn't have to be about dividing the time 100% equally, does it? It could be, there's lots of different ways. And I think the other thing sometimes lots of the parents I work with forget is kids go through phases with different parents and they need different parents at different times. So just because you start with one pattern doesn't mean that's where you're going to end up. And as children get older, they're more able to express a view, they're more able to say what they want. And ultimately, when they're a lot older, they just vote with their feet, don't they? They go to whoever's house they want to be in. So I think it's about creating two loving homes and allowing a pattern to evolve and develop, and not feeling that you've got to argue until you're kind of blue in the face to get the pattern you think you ultimately want, because that might only last a term anyway, because kids clubs and everything changes, and tennis is now on a Monday and not a Wednesday, and you can't possibly leave work on a Monday, so it goes round and round. The idea that you come up with a fixed pattern, I think, is deluding yourself. I think the key skill in all of this is, as you say, it's learning how to problem solve as parents who might not agree with each other a lot of the time, who might not like each other, but still having the emotional regulation to be able to engage productively in a debate, to get to a compromise solution and to move on. And that's a big ask from people when they're still very raw from separating.
Yes, I think it is a big ask, but it's a funny thing. I remember one of my couples saying to me, and it wasn't a couple, he was just the man, actually. I only worked with him. And he said to me, I feel closer to my ex-wife now.
We get that a lot as well.
Than I did, because the bits that I really liked about her, we now get to have. She's funny, she's creative, she's problem solving, she's all of these things. We outgrew the fit of being married. Like, if we knew more, we weren't, but we have amazing kids and we're doing that. So I think what I would there's real hope, there's massive, massive hope for improving the relationship dynamic by ending the marriage, if that's what needs to happen, but improving the communication, because the people will benefit will be both of you and it will be the children. And I don't know if you've got the same, but I've got the kind of graduation or the christening or the wedding test. Am I going to be in this? We have to go long. Am I going to be in a situation where when my kid gets married, we're both there? We're both invited, because we're not such a problem that our kid is like, no, I'm running away to Bali to do it, so I don't have to have my parents there. Because so many people they're just scared and upset, or it's awful when they have to have both parents there because there's going to be a problem. So I think it really matters. But I mean, men don't do well after divorce and breakup. Neither you women often do better. But if we can keep these relationships going, why not?
Yeah, no, it's definitely positive. In just a moment, I'm going to ask you to share your top tips on how to keep arguments from escalating. And I know people listening wouldn't want to miss that. But just before we get on to that, if this episode has given you even a bit of clarity or comfort, or just a top tip that's made you feel a little bit better or made things feel a bit more manageable, do make sure to follow the Divorce Podcast on your favorite podcast app. Each week, we're here trying to help with expert advice and real support to help you through the separation just one step at a time. So over to you, Eve. Then final tips for someone going through a separation and who wants to keep arguments calm and productive. What should they be doing?
So to keep arguments calm and productive, the key thing is understanding that people are not the problem. People have problems. Relationships have problems. And so what we want to do is, instead of saying he or she is this and does that and the other, even though we may be really hurt and annoyed and upset and frustrated by them, but when we are firing it out that they are the problem, what we're doing is that we're shining that light on them. Whereas actually what we need to do is say, what is it I need? What do I need help with? What do I need support with? So turning it from you to what is it that I need? What is it my children need? And then when we've got that statement, speaking to somebody really sensible will help you with that. Repeat it, because when we are attacking somebody else, they become defensive. When we are stating what it is that we need, because we've done that work, and it's hard work to say I and not you. But when we've done that work and we simply repeat it, what the actual psychology of the other brain is that they will listen. But people who are defensive don't listen, and people who are defensive don't change, and people who are defensive don't learn. So we need to take responsibility for the way we are speaking and use I need this, not you did that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Where can people find more information about you, Eve?
I am on all of the standard social medias at Eve Stanway. Just put it in and you'll find me. But alternatively, evestanway.co.uk is my website. And really from that, there's free resources. There's all sorts of stuff. I've tried to make it populated with good stuff. And I will be launching my own podcast very soon. I'm super excited.
Fantastic. Well, good luck with that. That sounds brilliant. For separation and co-parenting support, you can visit amicable.co.uk, where you can explore our resources or book a free advice consultation. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can hear more about new podcast episodes by subscribing for updates or visiting thedivorcepodcast.com, or find us on your favourite listening platforms. Finally, don't forget, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got any questions or ideas for podcasts and topics, please contact us at hello@amicable.co.uk. Thank you very much indeed, Eve, for joining me. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I feel a lot more equipped to deal with my children and our arguments than I did before starting this episode. So thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you so much for having me here.